death of Vincent Pyrwhit, J.P. of Ellerden House in the county of Buckinghamshire, would, in the ordinary way, have achieved no more notice than the death of any other simple country gentleman. The circumstances of his death, however, were sensational and attracted some notice at the time. It is the sort of case that is easily forgotten within a year, except just in the locality where it occurred. The most sensational circumstances of the case never came before the public at all. I give them here, simply and plainly. Pyrwhit was a very ordinary country gentleman, a good fellow, but in no way brilliant. He was devoted to his wife, who was some 15 years younger than himself, and remarkably beautiful. She was a good woman, but she had her faults. She was fond of admiration, and she was an abominable flirt. She misled men very cleverly, and then was sincerely angry with them for having been misled. Her husband never troubled his head about these flirtations, being assured that she was a good woman. He was not jealous. She, however, was possessed of a jealousy almost amounting to insanity. This might have caused trouble between them if he had given her the slightest basis on which her jealousy could work, but he never did. With the exception of his wife, women bored him. I believe she did once or twice try to make a scene for some preposterous reason, but nothing serious ever came from it, and there was never any real quarrel between them. On the death of his wife, after a prolonged illness, Pyrwhit wrote and asked me to come down to Ellerden for the funeral and to remain at least a few days with him. He would be quite alone, and I was his oldest friend. I hate attending funerals, but I was his oldest friend, and moreover, I was a distant relation of his wife. I had no choice, and I went down. The house was full of people for the funeral, which took place in the village churchyard, but they all left immediately afterward. The air of heavy gloom which hung over the house seemed to lift a little. The servants are always emotional. They continued to break down at regular intervals, noticeably Pyrwhit's man Williams. But Pyrwhit himself was self-possessed. He spoke of his wife with great affection and regret, but he could speak of her, and not unsteadily. At dinner, he spoke of one or two other topics, of politics and of his duties as magistrate, and of course he made the requisite fuss for his gratitude for my coming down to Ellerden at that time. After dinner, we adjourned to the library, a room well and expensively furnished, but without the least attempt at taste. There were a few oil paintings on the wall, a presentation portrait of himself, and a couple of landscapes, all more or less bad, as I recall. He had eaten very little at dinner. He had, however, drunk a good deal. The wine seemed to have no effect on him whatsoever. I had gotten the conversation definitely off the subject of his wife when I made a blunder. I saw a telephone extension standing on his writing table, and I said, "Oh, I wasn't aware that telephones had penetrated into the villages yet." "Yes," he said, "I believe they're common enough now. I had one fitted up in my wife's bedroom to communicate with her during her illness." At that point, the bell of the telephone rang sharply. We both looked at each other. I said with a stupid affectation of calmness, "Perhaps the servant wishes to speak with you." He got up, walked over to the machine, and swung the green cord towards me. "I had it disconnected this morning. Also, the door of that room is locked and no one could possibly be in it." He had turned the color of gray blotting paper. So probably had I. The bell rang again, a prolonged rattling ring, Well, are you going to answer it? I said. I am not, he said firmly. Well, then I shall answer it. It is probably some stupid trick for which you'll have to sack one of your domestics. My servants, he said, would not have done this thing. Besides, don't you see it is impossible? The instrument is disconnected. Well, the bell rang all the same. I shall try it. Hello, are you there? The voice which answered me was unmistakably the high staccato voice of Mrs. Pyrwhit. I want you to tell my husband that he will be with me tomorrow. I still listened. Nothing more was said. I repeated, are you there? But still there was no answer. I turned to Pyrwhit. There is no one there. Possibly there is thunder in the air affecting the bell in some way. I'm sure there is some simple explanation. He went to bed early that night. All the next day, I was with him. We went riding together. I expected an accident to happen at any moment, but none occurred. All that evening, I expected him to turn suddenly faint and ill, but this also did not happen. When at 10 o'clock he excused himself and said good night, I felt distinctly relieved. He went up to his room and rang for Williams. The rest, of course, is well known. The servant's reason had broken down, possibly the immediate cause being the death of Mrs. Pyrwhit. On entering his master's bedroom, without the least hesitation, he raised a loaded revolver and shot Pyrwhit through the heart. I believe the case is mentioned in some of the textbooks on homicidal mania.